by God, there was tactical voting. It was either going to be Pierre Poilievre as the next Prime Minister, or it was going to be Mark Carney. And following Donald Trump's intervention, Canadians said, it's Mark Carney.
He has been quite macho about his rhetoric. Unlike Starmer in the UK, Carney's come in and said, guess what? I'm going to spend more on public services and I'm going to cut taxes.
And in some ways, Carney represents the absolute antithesis, the sort of demons that Donald Trump likes to conjure of this sort of globalist man. And it's not that the world is turning MAGA, the world is turning against MAGA.
Have a very significant declaration to make.
This is looking to be a Mark Carney Liberal government. There is a live shot of Liberal Party headquarters in Ottawa.
America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never. But these are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen.
That was Mark Carney at his victory rally last night in this extraordinary turnaround election. He has won by standing up to Donald Trump, by taking the fight to Donald Trump, by not being bullied by Donald Trump.
He's a friend of Europe. He's an ally of Starmer. So will this now change how Britain starts to deal with Donald Trump? Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John in Toronto.
And it's Emily at Newsagents HQ. And it's the election that really was written off all until about 3 months ago. In fact, until Trump came to power. And just seeing Mark Carney stand there in the early hours in Ottawa declaring victory has not only, I guess, re-energised Canada and Canadian nationalism and how Canada sees itself, but has also sent out kind of bat signals across the Atlantic to where we are. And the questions, I guess, that are now arising from this is, what will Carney's approach to Trump be? And is it something that we might try and emulate here? Is it, in fact, going to embolden Starmer to think, I've got one ally in North America. What about how we deal and trade and talk to the EU and Europe here? Isn't that going to be more important than any trade deal that has yet to surface with America? So we're going to be discussing a bit later. But it was actually a really dramatic night there, Sopes. I mean, we saw not one party leader but two lose their seats, and we still don't know what the actual shape of the parliamentary majority looks like, or even if there is one.
Yeah, exactly. As we're speaking now, there are still about 2 or 3 dozen seats which are apparently too close to call, and there are counts and recounts going on, and that will determine whether Mark Carney has a clear majority. He needs to get to 172 seats, then he's got a majority. Will he fall short of that? No, he's definitely going to be the next Prime Minister. That's clear. What you also saw was a reassertion of two-party politics. And Pierre Poilievre, who 3 months ago wasn't just measuring up the curtains, he'd ordered the curtains for the prime ministerial residence. He knew he was going to win the election. Not only did he lose last night, he lost his seat as well. And that must really hurt. And there was another political leader who lost as well, which is Jagmeet Singh, from the NDP, which is the sort of more left-wing party in Canadian politics. And their vote was really squeezed because unlike the UK general election, where we saw the end of two-party politics, if you like, last year, when Labour and Conservative only managed to pick up something like 57% of the votes, last night, Liberals and Conservative picked up 84% of the vote. This was a reassertion of two-party politics, and we talked about it on the podcast yesterday, and you raised that question with me, Emily, about whether there would be tactical voting. By God, there was tactical voting. It was either going to be Pierre Poilievre as the next Prime Minister, or it was going to be Mark Carney. And following Donald Trump's intervention, Canadians said, it's Mark Carney.
Yeah. I mean, Jagmeet Singh, I guess, was the sacrificial lamb in this one because his party, as you say, the New Democrats, collapsed from, 17% to 5-6%. So all those people who suddenly saw that if it was going to be a choice, a binary choice, that they had to vote for the continued existence of Canada went for Carney over their own party preference. And I guess the other person we should talk about, I suppose, is Trudeau. Because there is something about Trudeau. I keep thinking of, do you remember the Cat in the Hat with the bath ring? And how it travels around. Trudeau did something kind of...
I'm dying to know where this metaphor is going. I never thought Dr. Seuss was going to be making an appearance in this episode.
Well, I tell you what I ended up thinking. When Trudeau left in January, just as you were saying yesterday, he could have passed, as it were, the dirty bath ring to Carney. But he didn't. So everything went with Trudeau. The whole idea of woke, the whole idea of liberal, the whole idea of, whether he'd actually taken Canada backwards or made it poorer or pushed up inflation, all that kind of stuff kind of stuck to Trudeau. And when Carney came in, he was actually seen as this banker figure. So I think people trusted him with the economics. They saw him as a new face. And it was quite a sort of... it was good timing on Trudeau's part to go, and he did.
Oh, it was brilliant timing. And the other thing that he did, and this should not be underestimated, you talked about how Carney defined himself as very different from Trudeau. And, Trudeau was gone, and so were a lot of his policies. And so the Liberals really could try and wipe the slate clean. But who's seen Trudeau? Has anyone seen Justin Trudeau?
Yeah.
Where is he? Haven't seen him at all. He disappeared from the campaign so that he could not be a reminder, and it wouldn't have allowed Pierre Poilievre to say, oh, look, Trudeau's still in the background. He's pulling the strings. There he is, just lurking over Mark Carney's shoulder. Trudeau disappeared. Very, very smart move. I think the Liberals have shown a certain brutality and efficiency in this election in the way that they've done it. Well, anyway, so last night we went off out of Toronto to one of the electoral districts, which was being keenly fought and where there were high hopes for the Liberals. So we're about 20 miles north of Toronto. Polling stations close in about 20 minutes. We've come to the Thornhill pub and the Thornhill electoral district, where Leanne Cotler is the Liberal candidate hoping to switch a Conservative seat. And this is where her watch party is going to be this evening. And all the televisions are focused on the early results coming in from the east of Canada, where the polling stations closed a little earlier. I mean, early days yet. But it looks like the Conservatives are doing rather better than the polls might have anticipated. Well, the polls have now closed for the Toronto area. Leanne Cotler, the candidate for the Liberals in this riding, I want to say constituency, but we'll call it a riding because I'm here.
We can call it a constituency too. Our system is based on the British parliamentary system.
So how are you feeling? Because this is a Conservative area, isn't it?
It is held. The incumbent is a Conservative, that's correct.
How are you feeling?
I have a sense of equanimity about this situation.
Equanimity is not a word I often hear. I often hear people say, I think I'm going to win, or I don't think I've done it.
I know that I had an incredible team during this campaign, and I know everybody gave it their all. We've left nothing out there.
What do you feel about the general election as a whole, and whether the Liberals are going to maintain power?
Of course.
You sure?
Of course. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, will continue to be the Prime Minister.
With a clear majority?
Oh, yeah. I'm so frustrated by what's going on south of the border. Instead of just being an anxious mess of frustration, do something. So I threw my name into the ring, and here we are.
So there's just been a big round of applause here because on the TV, the main Canadian network is projecting that the Liberals are going to win this federal election here in Canada. The most astonishing turnaround given where this party was 3 months ago. They changed their leader, and then there is Donald Trump.
I'm just really happy that the first hurdle's passed and that we've got government back. So, yeah.
Do you think there'll be an overall majority?
That's what we're hoping to clap for next.
Right, we'll be watching. When do you reckon that will happen?
after Quebec and Ontario are in. So we're hoping Quebec is going to save us again. So.
And what's really happened is there's been a real squeeze on the smaller parties in this election, hasn't there?
I think because there's fear of Conservatives being too close to Trump. So yeah, it's Canadian nationalism rising up. So yeah.
What has happened in this election? How do you explain it?
This election is about Canada and Donald Trump. And it's been about who is the best person to lead Canada in its dealings with Donald Trump. That's what it's about.
So Donald Trump has completely changed the parameters of this election, given where we were a few months ago.
Absolutely right. Yes. I think Canadians have been in shock at, one, that he was not joking about us becoming the 51st state. That's one. And second, that he imposed these tariffs on us. You know, Canada and the United States have always been best friends. And so to have Donald Trump levy the tariffs on Canada and trash the North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada, US, and Mexico is shocking for Canadians. And so the reaction has been, we need a strong government, we need a leader that has the stature of Mark Carney and the experience, and he's also an economist, which isn't a bad word, to protect Canada during the next 4 years.
The Conservatives didn't break through. At the moment, it doesn't look like that, and the smaller parties are really getting squeezed.
The small parties look like they're being crushed tonight.
Most of them, yeah, mostly. The NDP especially. They'll lose most of their seats.
And is the dynamic of this election the fact that the Liberals changed leader, or is it really all Donald Trump?
It's both. I think if, let's say, Trudeau had stayed and the Trump factor was still there, the Liberals might have done better, but not nearly enough to win. And I think with the change of leader and Trump factor, it's created this result.
As often happens on election nights, things start to swing one way and then the other. It's all gone a little bit quiet inside the Thornhill pub. The race is tightening a bit. Mark Carney looks like he is going to be the next Prime Minister, but whether with a majority or not, still unclear. But Leanne Cotler looks like she's getting ready to concede her fight in this electoral district.
And although we have not won the Battle of Thornhill, let us be grateful Mark Carney will be the Prime Minister of Canada. Every single one of you, all of you have contributed to that outcome. We all spread the word that the best person to lead us through the Trump troubles is Mark Carney, the adult in the room. Canada is going to go through some challenging times. And I love this country very much. I love James Moore, but I love this country. I love what this country represents, and I will fight to keep it sovereign. These past few months have toughened our resolve as Canadians. And as we come through this, we will be economically stronger. Do what you can to pitch in. Buy Canadian products. Never, never be the 51st state.
This party is now kind of winding up. Leanne Cotler did not get across the line, but Mark Carney is going to be the next Canadian Prime Minister. Whether with an overall majority or not, we probably won't know for some time yet. What we do have, though, is a political earthquake, given where the Liberals were 3 months ago. And the other thing is, there is now a leader in North America who is looking to Britain to do business, to trade, because his market in America is closing down. And that's going to help the UK. So Carney wants to do more trade with the UK and the EU. And in a moment, we'll consider that relationship. Canada, the US, Britain and Europe.
So I guess the question is, having campaigned in poetry, to coin a phrase, having campaigned to continue Canada's existence and to stand up to America, what does that actually mean now for Carney? And in a way, I think what makes his role interesting is that he has been quite macho about his rhetoric. He's threatened retaliatory tariffs. Very few countries have actually done that to Trump. He's saying he's got to diversify Canada's trading relationship. He's going to boost stagnant wages. He's going to lower housing costs. These are all the things he's promised. He's going to eliminate carbon taxes on small businesses and farms. And I think the thing that will give him his kind of next energy is that, unlike Starmer in the UK, Carney's come in and said, guess what? I'm going to spend more on public services and I'm going to cut taxes. I mean, if anything, he's sort of, right now, he's sounding more like a Blair figure than a Starmer figure. Is that fair?
I think that is fair. I think it's well worth using the old kind of you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose, because the reality is that 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States of America. He cannot flick a switch and overnight reroute all that trade to the UK and Europe. America is still going to be critically important, and managing that relationship is going to take some skill and adroitness, particularly with someone as unpredictable as Donald Trump. And in some ways, Carney represents the absolute antithesis, the sort of demons that Donald Trump likes to conjure of this sort of globalist man. But I suspect that Trump will begrudgingly respect his determination and will see how Carney won this general election. So I don't know what he'll do. I don't know whether he will kind of reinvent himself as he is a much more Blairite politician. And I think Keir Starmer is a much more cautious politician. Keir Starmer hasn't taken the fight to that many people in his career. He's wanted to go softly. And, listening to the British mindset about relations with America is still, I think, very deferential. And I think that Starmer was hoping, I might be able to get a trade deal before we have to make any kind of agreement with the EU. And if I could get that under the line quickly, wouldn't that be great? I don't think that's going to happen. And therefore, Starmer does have some difficult choices to make. And I know he's going to maintain the mantra. It's a false dichotomy to say you've got to choose between Europe and the USA. But I think there's a bit of that is real.
Yeah, I mean, your favourite Prime Minister, Sopes, the one you always quote, is the guy in Love Actually, the Hugh Grant character in Love Actually. And I think Carney has come sort of closest of anyone in our lifetime to embodying that. And I wonder if there isn't a little bit of the UK public brain that sort of looks at Starmer and thinks, I wish you'd do a bit more of that. Carney is doing what Ed Davey has done for the Lib Dems, but he's done it from a position of power. I mean, there was some suggestion that Carney and Trump had a phone call early on, and Carney made it clear that Canada would be prepared to dump US government bonds, right? In the way that we always talk about China having, $3 trillion dollars worth of US government bonds, and that would be a massive crash to US consumer confidence, economic confidence. Now, Canada doesn't have anywhere near that much, but even just to sort of put that in the ether to say, if it's not looking good, we might want to get rid of that, might have been enough to sort of show Trump he was fairly serious. Now, we have seen, we should say, these kind of like these sort of trade war beginnings. There was a moment with Doug Ford back in March. Doug Ford's the sort of principal of Ontario, who said, do you remember this? He said, I'm going to switch off all the electricity to 3 US states until Trump drops it. And then Trump got back on the phone and was like, in fact, I'm going to triple your tariffs to Canada then, or to Ontario. And it sort of ratcheted up a bit. I mean, I guess we might be in for a little bit of that first before things settle down. But I think, as you say, all this talk of a UK-US trade deal that seems so live about 3 weeks ago, just before the Chancellor's spring statement, has gone very quiet. I mean, Pat McFadden at the weekend was definitely not talking that up. And you can't help wondering whether Starmer's kind of thinking, well, if that ain't happening, then wouldn't I be better off looking to more reliable trading partners, talking more to the EU, talking more to Canada? Politico have a story that the EU and Britain are set to sign what they're calling a formal declaration, which commits to free and open trade. Now, you know, I don't know what a formal declaration is. I don't know if it's a trade deal. I don't know if it opens up a whole host of sort of, you know, new, slightly pre-Brexity kind of arrangements, but it sounds like a rapprochement of sorts. And all this comes before that Brussels meeting on May the 19th, when we know that the Chancellor wants to talk about, you know, visas for young people, freedom of movement, more freedom of movement for young people on a visa scheme with the EU. And you can't help wondering if Starmer's kind of going, well, if I've got Carney there, and Carney's going to be my ally, and Trump is not moving on the tariffs, and we know how upset Starmer was by that 10% tariff that hit us, even though, you know, we'd made all the right noises and we weren't part of the EU. You know, maybe Starmer's kind of going, I'm not going to hang around anymore.
Well, we've also got 25% tariffs on steel and auto, and that is a big export that from Britain to the United States. You've rightly focused on the economics of all of this and what kind of trade deal and what sort of trading relationship we go to forward with the United States and what it is with the European Union and this sort of grand declaration of intent. There's also the politics of this. I mean, you know, at the moment, for the moment, Keir Starmer has stayed very silent on Donald Trump saying he wants to make Canada the 51st state.
Yeah.
Canada is part of the Commonwealth. The head of state of Canada is the King. Donald Trump wants a second state visit to cozy up to King Charles. Well, what's going to happen in that conversation? Is King Charles going to say, Donald, knock it off? You know, the Canadian people have spoken. They want to stay part of the Commonwealth. They're an independent sovereign nation. And I think there is some real politics there. Where does Starmer stand on that? He, you know, when we interviewed him the other week up in Hull, he didn't want to get drawn on the second state visit or the things that, you know, that Trump had said about Canada. But at some point, Britain is going to have to say, hang on, we are on Canada's side unequivocally. Because I think that anything else would seem like an absolute cop-out and sell-out and smack of weakness, that the sort of thing that Donald Trump will seize upon.
Let me read you this YouGov poll. Words you never thought you'd be reading out loud in April of 2025. If an armed conflict were to break out between Canada and the US, Britons tend to think that the UK should take Canada's side. The numbers are 47% of Britons think that we should be on Canada's side, and only 8% think we should be on the side of the US. I mean, the neither is 29%, which I guess goes to the point, which is like, you didn't really think you'd have to ask this question in a YouGov poll. But there you are. I mean, I think the position of the Brits is pretty clear on that, you know, somebody explained the whole kind of existence of Canada to me in these terms, which was that, in essence, if you go right back to, you know, the American War of Independence and the Boston Tea Party, you know, tariff-related taxes again, then Canada was the bit that America didn't get, you know, that the independence of America left Canada, you know, left the French-speaking Quebec outside on its own, the bit that remained close to Britain, the bit that remained in the Commonwealth. It was the bit of North America that never wanted its independence. And I think that speaks to where we are now, which is, yeah, Canada has proved it wants to keep ties in some strange way with us, with our head of state. As you say, the King is the head of state. Of course, Brits would have to take Canada's side. It seems absolutely treacherous to think otherwise.
Exactly. Just conjuring the image in your head that you could be facing a Russia-Ukraine situation where American tanks amassing on the border with Canada is just preposterous and unthinkable somehow. I can't help thinking that Donald Trump, look, he doesn't admit, yeah, that's been a chastening experience, although he did with the bond markets a tiny bit. I think he must recognise that the idea of Canada as the 51st state is not going to happen. The impact of his rhetoric has been to reinforce a liberal victory against the person he wanted to see there, which was a populist MAGA-light, maple syrup MAGA of Pierre Poilievre. And, this Saturday, Maitlis, we've got an election in Australia, which again, it looked like the Conservatives, the Liberals, as it's confusingly called, were going to win there. And it looks like now, because of Trump's tariffs, that Anthony Albanese, the Labour Party candidate and the current Prime Minister, will be returned to office, which again, 3 months ago seemed improbable, impossible. But Canada has proved how much Donald Trump can upset politics and economics. And, and it's not that the world is turning MAGA, the world is turning against MAGA.
Yeah, I mean, as we creep up to the 100 days of Trump conversation, we're on the eve of that now. Wednesday will mark the first 100 days of Trump's second administration. You can point to very tangible effects of having Trump in power, which is Liberals in Canada and potentially Liberals in Australia. That is the effect that Trump is having on the wider world.
Well, Trump is going to be parading his successes in Detroit later today. And once we finish this recording, Maitlis, we're getting in the car and we're driving the 4 hours to Detroit to be at his rally, which will bring you tomorrow. But we'll be back in a moment with a new spat. It's about tariffs that's broken out between Donald Trump and Jeff Bezos.
So just before we came to the studio, we were watching the inimitable Caroline Leavitt, press secretary to the White House, to Donald Trump. And she was giving her usual press conference alongside the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. And it was meant to be a sort of heralding of Trump's economic successes so far, ahead of this 100 days mark that comes tomorrow on Wednesday. And it was curious that we listened to about 15 maybe questions, expecting somebody in the White House court to mention the Canada elections, and that didn't come up at all. But one story that did, really interesting, is about Amazon's new move, this putative move by the company Amazon to essentially tell American consumers how much the cost of Trump tariffs is adding to their purchases. Just listen to the response and the question here.
So it was reported this morning that Amazon will soon display a little number next to the price of each product that shows how much the Trump tariffs are adding to the cost of each product. So isn't that a perfect, crystal clear demonstration that it's the American consumer and not China who is going to have to pay for these policies?
I will take this, since I just got off the phone with the president about Amazon's announcement. This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years? And I would also add that it's not a surprise because, as Reuters recently wrote, Amazon has partnered with a Chinese propaganda arm. So this is another reason why Americans should buy American. It's another reason why we are onshoring critical supply chains here at home to shore up our own critical supply chain and boost our own manufacturing here.
Is Jeff Bezos still a Trump supporter?
Look, I will not speak to the president's relationships with Jeff Bezos, but I will tell you that this is certainly a hostile and political action by Amazon.
Hostile and political act. Inflation is something that people live with because of global events and circumstances. The tariffs are directly imposed by Donald Trump. It seems a perfectly reasonable thing to do to explain to people what the impact is. But obviously, in Donald Trump's world, that is an act of treachery. And so Bezos' best efforts to get on side with Donald Trump look like they've hit a bit of a roadblock.
I genuinely think this is the place at which the rubber hits the road because, you can be kind of a MAGA believer. You can be really full of the joys of Trump up to a point. But if you actually start seeing in very clear dollar figures what he is doing to the price of ordinary goods, I just wonder how long before that starts to filter through. And already people are kind of asking that question. Why is Amazon the villain for making the hidden tax visible, but not the government that imposed it, you know. And is this going to be a tipping point for Trump? If he starts to lose his billionaires, if Jeff Bezos is sort of caught between, well, do I tell customers what's going on, or do I just sit nicely and shut up and sort of, you know, be nice to Trump? I just think this is one of those interesting moments where Amazon has got a lot of power with the American consumer. Now, look, Levitt's response, you know, more widely, I guess speaks to Trump's bigger plan, which is, well, if we had more manufacturing in America, if we had more onshoring, if we didn't have to depend on China to buy our goods, wouldn't that be a better place to be? Lots of Americans might agree with that in theory, but actually, you know, that's a world away from clicking a button, which has got another price tag on it because of the direct actions your own government's taken.
Well, I'll be fascinated to see whether Bezos folds and reverses this policy, because remember, Jeff Bezos, as publisher of the Washington Post, decided it wouldn't endorse anybody before the election, as it was trying to do kind of deals for his space company at the same time. So let's see what happens there. But I'm going to be in Detroit. I'm going to ask the auto workers who are affected by these tariffs. They still love Donald Trump on an awful lot of things. But as you say, tariffs is where the rubber hits the road. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.